Hi, and welcome to the Prism of Perspective podcast. I am super excited to be here today with one of my lifetime best friends, Peter Weiler. He's just an exceptional guy, an endurance athlete who has been in that world for a long time, competing, running in very competitively sub 3 hour marathons in the past, right? He's now, Pete's right around my age. I think you're 60 also, correct?
60, right?
Yeah, so we're two 60-year-olds sitting here kind of reflecting back on our lives. But in addition to that, really an exceptional business owner, the CEO and chief advisor with Strategic Retirement Group, which has done an amazing job putting that team together. And then I think the place that obviously brings you the most joy is really the family. You know, beautiful wife, Michelle, and 3 children who are all exceptional. And so it's been a pleasure working with Pete. We've been working in a coaching client relationship for 15 years. Mm-hmm. So we've definitely known each other for a long time. And he was kind enough to offer himself up to come into to introduce some of these different things that he's working on, things that are really exciting in his life. And we're going to dive into that. And so what I'd love to do, as you know, the Prism of Perspective is looking at our lives through the prism, really thinking about how are we using our beliefs, our energy, and our presence to create the lives that we want. And we're going to look at both the present moment, how does that show up today in our lives, how are we using it, but also as we move through our lives, some of the great decisions we made and some of the less than great decisions that we made, and how are those things impacted by maybe some of the beliefs we had, how, you know, maybe we were managing energy in a good way or not a good way, or we were not as skilled in really managing our presence, and maybe we were reactive rather than responsive to our lives. So I know that you had an interesting or challenging beginning to your life, and so we can kind of dive into that a little bit just to give you some background on some of the things that you've had an opportunity to work through forever.
Yeah, it still are.
Still working through them, right? So, but if we kind of look back, even at your childhood, tell me about some of the, you know, I know that you lost your mom when you were just 2 years old.
Yeah, 9 months old.
9 months old. Sorry about that. And so,
yeah, well, I was going to wear my shirt raised with wolves that I have at home. I wear it like proudly now. But yeah, I was brought up, on Long Island, middle class. Dad was a school teacher. Mom was a nurse, and she died suddenly of a brain tumor when I was 9 months old. I had a sister 2 years old, a brother 4 years old, and a brother 5 years old. So 1963, my father was like, leave it to Beaver, carrying a briefcase off to work with his hat, and suddenly his wife dies. I just can't imagine. Until I was a grown man, did I even reflect on that for a second, right? Until I had my own kids. Right. And then it just hit me like, wow, what a shocking experience. So, it affected us all. It devastated us. And it wasn't until, again, later, many decades later, that I realized the impact of what the death of a parent, mother or father has on a child. So I think for whatever reason, I don't know why, but my judgment is all 4 of us became train wrecks for most of our lives. And somehow I'm the one that jumped into recovery earliest, into recovery, into AA, and I was in my mid-20s, and I found a path that worked for me, and then from there it was therapy and, group therapy, and I even tried church a couple different times, and anything that would create that communitas that we read about in the books, that feeling of that flow. And so I became that flow junkie, that good feeling junkie. And so my life, catapulted into a reality that I never imagined. Right. I remember when I first got sober, my first sponsor would say, write down a list of where you want your life to be in 10 years. And I guarantee you that in 10 years, you'll have sold yourself short if it's just that. Yeah. And that's so true for me.
Right. So the neat thing is that when you began to kind of release some of the maybe anger or frustration or upset, or the framing that you had about, maybe living in a dangerous world, right? Having to fend for yourself, and
Right.
like you said, raised by wolves,
Right.
and saying, oh, maybe maybe I could be a pack of wolves, right? Maybe this AA is a pack that we can raise one another in a way.
Exactly. It was like a new family that I never had. I lost touch with most of my siblings for most of my adult life. And then lately there's been a rekindling, there's been a reunion, and so that's a good, that's a great development in my life. So AA, I think, was my start to kind of being introspective and taking a look at what I'm doing. And your book, Prisms of Perspective, talks about the belief system we had at the time, and that's the colors we see, right? I talked about that with a friend of mine on my ride this morning. I was telling him about this podcast, and I was telling him about a story I may want to get to later about this pond guy.
Okay.
It's a pond guy.
I'll make sure that we hit on the pond guy.
The pond guy story about how, prior to that, I ran my life in win-lose. It was win-lose. Like when I was searching for love in all the wrong places, I wanted to get what I needed. And either I'd get what I need or you're going to get what you need. And tough luck if you don't, you'll get it the next time from someone else. And that's what my belief system was. So when I broke into the financial services business shortly after getting sober, or actually shortly before I got sober, just like the character in your book.
Yep.
So I really related to that character in your book, who is that young financial planner trying to get sober and create a career and has all this talent, right? All this ability, but doesn't know how to harness it, right? Until he gets the coaching from those individuals. So I was that guy, totally. But when I got the taste of the paychecks and then what they could buy me and the nice car and the nice apartment, and the nice vacations, I just wanted more of that, So I spent like a good next 10 years of my sobriety just chasing my tail in that way, until I got into some really deep therapy, which was, which is kind of easy to talk about nowadays more than it was 30 years ago, right?
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is that, your evolution, right? You continue to make some little strides, and you found some support groups and things along those lines. But of course, all our belief systems don't automatically go away, right? And the goals and objectives and what we've been striving for, thinking is important, those motivations, they still sit there until, like you said, become a little introspective and say, hey, is that really what I want?
Yeah.
Is that really going to... And so when you start getting the nice car and the nice apartment and the nice vacations and things along those lines, they're fun, but they don't sustain, right? And you go from one to the next, almost shifting addictions.
Right. The hedonistic treadmill or something they call it.
Right. Yep.
You just want more of what you got.
You want more, and then you have it, and you have that momentary experience, and it feels good. You get some, dopamine hits or whatever happens to be, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, it's time for some more. Yeah. Almost like a drug addiction.
Yeah.
Because it's not sustaining. It's just temporary.
Yeah.
And
I think, I always say I refer to my rough upbringing. I like to tell my kids stories about, when I got beat up in a bar or something like that. They love those stories. But really, my life compared to most of the world was not that rough. Okay. I mean, it was tragic in the way that I lost a love, but I had so many opportunities, They weren't opening. When I was 25 and I was knocking on doors of rich white people in Boca Raton, they weren't opening the doors for black kids, selling them insurance, or brown kids, okay? They wouldn't have opened the doors there. So metaphorically, a lot of doors opened up for me because I was born into the control group in a popular land in a free country. I think it was Gary Vee that talks about that. Man, if you're born into a free country in the popular group, you got nothing to complain about. Why aren't you happy?
Yeah, and you think about, like, you grow up in Long Island. I grew up in South Jersey, and what I know about those areas is the education was great.
Yes.
And so whatever we were doing, we were still also, there was a public educational system that was giving us the skill set that ultimately, even if we were ignoring it along the way, we learned how to communicate. We learned how to do those things through that process. And so we have, like you said, kind of a set of skills that we were fortunate to be born in a particular time and place and society that enabled us to move forward. So I'm with you on that one.
Right.
Even to think about the number of mistakes I made along the way probably would have been the end of the road for someone that wasn't in a good position.
Yeah.
But there was forgiveness. I remember they may have had experiences similar. I was pulled over. I never got a DUI, but I was pulled over 4 times when I was absolutely drunk. And somehow or another, I didn't get a DUI.
Yeah.
And I don't think that probably wouldn't happen for everyone else. You know, I was in a college town. I'm a college educate. You know, who are you going to get? I'm a college boy. You know, and so you kind of get a little bit of leeway and all that.
I'm going up next week for the weekend to a reunion of sorts of my 4 grammar school friends from 5th grade. We all turned 60 the same month.
Yep.
We all got together when we turned 50 10 years ago, and there was a dozen guys from other areas of our lives out at my friend's mom's house that he inherited on Eastern Long Island. So we're going back there. So we were recently texting in our text group, as we do, when we were talking about all the crazy things we did and got away with.
Mm-hmm.
Like having the cops dump out our bag of pot and then going back the next day and trying to find the buds out of the curb, you know? Yep. And I threw in the statement after 4 or 5 stories, I threw in the line in the group text, and you know, if we were black or brown, we'd probably still be in jail.
Right. May not still be, but certainly would have visited. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's incredible that it's perspective and how people see things. And again, cops have tough jobs, but you know, and we begin to see the world through a particular lens, and then that's what we see.
Right.
And so fortunately for us, the lens often that we are looked at may have been better than we were showing up, right? The expectation of who we were was probably a little better than the, you know, drunken guy running around causing hell.
And, you know, that's, I think, one of the favorite parts of your book for me was that first part about the belief system is what determines what colors of all the different colors that we see. And I see that so present in my clients and the people I work with and the people in my family, my friends who are like stuck in beliefs like it's their, you know, their sacred cow or their beautiful baby belief.
One of the things, I was having a conversation with another friend, actually a gentleman that I did a podcast with, also Greg Bennett, about the idea that the prism of perspective is like the flip side of the prison of perspective.
Yeah.
And so if somebody is unwilling to look at their life from a different lens, if they're more committed to being right than they are to understanding what is true, then they're going to fight for and actually imprison themselves in a particular perspective. And what we're really seeking to do is stay, I'm stealing this from the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, open, curious and committed to learning rather than closed, defensive, and committed to being right. So that's wonderful. So that's kind of cool. So let's kind of move forward. You've done some great work, and I know that one of the areas that you're most excited about now is continuing to evolve yourself and also help men grow, because many of us have, you know, I grew up without a father, and you know, so there's a lot of us that have kind of these big wounds. And I know that I had an opportunity to participate in a program that you're involved with, Deeper, MKP, the Mankind Project. Tell me a little more about how that's showing up for you and what's great about that for you.
Well, what's great about that for me is not only is the organization great, but for the way it fits into my life is great. You know, here I am, a team leader, and I have, you know, like carte blanche with what I can, you know, tell people what to do, so to speak. And so I'm at a part in my life where I'm not needed at work 40 hours a week. I don't have to have 10 client meetings a week, right? So I have this free time. And so 10 years ago, I started transitioning at work to let me do more that's in my skill set, more that it's in my special skills, and less of the things that drain me, right? So I'm finding now that I'm getting on what they call the second curve. I just read another great book, by the way. It's From Strength to Strength, and it's
I love it.
You got, you know that one?
Oh yeah.
I just finished it this morning. I love it. It talks about attaining the second curve.
It's Arthur Brooks, right?
Arthur Brooks, the second curve of life.
Yeah.
As we, you know, the first curve is our fluid intelligence, which we all go into decline, right?
Right.
I start looking,
crystallized,
and then we crystallize intelligence. We jump on, and I'm so identified with that. So I'm on that second curve.
So let's talk about that since we brought it up, and let's make it a little more clear.
Yeah.
My understanding of it, and I read it a little while ago, is, you know, a lot of like the super creative pieces when we look at periods of time in our life, whether there's learning or we're at the edges, and we have in our kind of 25, 35 range, this fluid intelligence where you look at the level of energy you're able to bring and the creativity. And so sometimes, people will look at that period of time as their most productive. But I think what Arthur Brooks is really sharing is that what we want to do is, rather than hold on to the past, continue to evolve.
Yes, don't rage through our decline.
Right.
Like Beethoven did.
Right.
Right. Until he didn't, right?
Right.
But for a period when he was going deaf.
Right. I was fighting against everything.
Raging. And we all know strivers, you used that word before.
Yep.
We're all strivers, rage through the decline, and it's just not a pretty sight.
And even your fitness you right? The
exactly.
difference, like, Thomas, now. I mean, at some level you could be in battle with your son, who's also an endurance athlete, right. But he's 20.
Yeah.
And at 60, it would be a really frustrating thing to be.
I stopped running 2 years ago because of my hip.
Right.
And now I'm on a gravel bike, and I'm riding slow in the woods. But you know what? I'm 60. I'm still riding on the back of the pack of 45-year-olds. But I'm not trying to beat them anymore.
Right.
I'm on my second curve.
Yeah, and continually thriving and finding, like, where is that space for me as a 60-year-old that's appropriately challenging,
right? So
that you can continue to maintain and sustain, and also even learn to grow in different ways. There's another good book in that area called Nar Country by Stephen Kotler.
Robbie's reading that one right now.
Okay,
yeah,
so Nar Country is really a study by Stephen Kotler, who is he's a multi-time New York Times bestseller, but he's also the director of the Flow Research Collective. And what he's looking at is, how do we age effectively? And what's kind of cool that it ties into what Arthur Brooks is saying is that as we age, we actually mature in our ability to have more big ideas and empathy and our ability to connect.
Yeah, so I have a great metaphor that he uses in the book that it so fits me. All the young guys that are not in decline yet, right? Mm-hmm. They're like computers. They have all the answers, all the information on the spot. So we have the old big library. So when they ask me a question, I'm like, yeah, I'll be right back. I'm going to go get that book. But I'll stop for a cup of coffee on the way, or I'll forget what book I'm looking for. But eventually I'll come out of the library with the perfect book, and everyone in the room will be amazed and say, wow, how did you know? Then I go, well, crystallized intelligence. I've got a whole vast library here that I can tap into. And that's a good feeling. That's a good king energy for me in my second phase. And I'm looking for more of that in my life.
So cool. You brought up king energy, and I know through the MKP project, that was something that I was introduced to.
Yeah.
And actually, one of the things that motivated me to go to MKP was looking at the idea that I felt like my king energy was not as developed as I'd like it to be.
Right.
I was raised by two women, essentially, my mom and my sister.
Right. Many are, right.
And so I feel like I've really well-developed kind of lover energy, a lot of the empathy, and and also even the magician side. Mm-hmm. I'm less so developed around the king and the warrior. Right. And so that was the real attraction to me to the MKP. So talk a little bit about what we're talking about there, and where does that come from?
Well, I'll start off with first defining what MKP, Mankind Project, is an international, not-for-profit training and education organization for men. Now, there are offshoots for women called Women Within, but it was started by four guys in Wisconsin in the mid '80s, and they started getting together. And so they looked for mentors, right? So they looked at a lot of the Joseph Campbell stuff about the hero's journey. They liked about that resonated with them. They pulled a lot of Carl Jung psychology. This is where the archetypes, which are parts of us that we all have active in us, and you can do a deep dive into all. There's probably 30 of them. They focused on the four: lover, warrior, magician, and king. There's a great book written by Robert Bly, who was one of the founders. He wrote, and it's a book of that title. So that's a good book that I think is useful. And so they basically, they have weekends around the country and around the world where they invite men to go for 48 hours to have a personal experience where they can touch a deeper truth about themselves, whatever they choose their work is. So, you never tell a man what his work is. He decides what his work is. Our job on a weekend is to keep him safe. Right. So you can investigate these areas without re-traumatizing yourself or, stepping backwards, right? So you just touch a little truth, and that's where the work starts. And then you follow up with weekly, monthly support groups that you go to. So we have a meeting a couple times a month with in between 5 and 12, 15 guys show up. Some are new, some have been there for a lot of years, some have done weekends. So there's all different levels of experience, and it's amazing. I have seen some amazing things happen, not only at the weekends, which you have seen, right?
Yep.
Which are just, this guy's life is never going to be the same.
Absolutely. They have the opportunity to continue to develop. The thing is, once you walk away,
you could just put it
in your pocket and forget about it.
Right.
And so that's why it's really important to have those support groups.
I think it is. I mean, some guys go to a weekend and they get what they need and they're done, and it shifts their life a little bit, and they stop kicking the dog. Okay. Maybe that's enough for them.
Right.
But I'm all in because I've been in this since 2016. I went to the weekend just like you did, on the recommendation of a friend who I respected, and it was awesome. And I just remember every weekend I've done since, and there's been maybe half a dozen or more where I've staffed and helped facilitate, and you can grow in this training opportunities with this group. But one of the most important parts of the weekend for me is when, at some point, when a man touches a deeper truth, he looks in the mirror, and almost always I hear the words, "I'm going to be okay now," or "Everything's going to be okay now."
Right.
And that's the gold. If that happens once in a weekend, that's worth, the $100 I pay to go.
Yeah. And one of the things that you said I thought was really important is everybody chooses their own work. So I mentioned that my work was around king
right.
or warrior. Right?
A lot of guys need lover work.
A lot of guys need lover work, right? Yeah. They were developed in an area where don't cry, don't show emotion,
you, right.
And right. So, they may have plenty of that war. They may have an overabundance of warrior.
Right.
And one of their challenges is that they're so rigid and so hard that they're not able to open up. And so for them, their big work might be lover, right? And so the cool thing is that there's really a lot of areas inside there. And even like king, right? You could be an underexpressed king or you could be an overexpressed king. And you might have king work bringing yourself back into space.
Right.
That might be, okay, you need to pull that back a little bit because that overexpression of that archetype is actually getting in your way.
And you can become a tyrannical king.
Right. You can be a tyrannical king, right?
Not the benevolent king.
Right. Right, which is what you're shooting for, right?
Exactly. And so every archetype has the healthy and the unhealthy version. And so many times we pull out, especially me, I pull out the warrior, but it's the bully warrior.
Right.
It's my big personality. I know exactly what you need to do, John. Just fucking do it, and you'll be okay.
That's right. Yeah, right? You're taking control.
Yeah. Whereas the other warrior has a shield. I always tell my son, you got two weapons too. You got a sword, but you also have a shield, and the shield is the ping, 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 ping. You just deflect those guys' hits.
Right.
And that's a useful tool.
So, what I found also about the warrior work is it's great to, when you build that shield, right? You build the comfort to ping, ping, ping and defend. It allows you to stay in presence and not be triggered and in fear in life. So you're actually able to be responsive rather than reactive. And that's, in a lot of ways, if you think about the backside of the prism where you talk about being present, if you don't have enough warrior, you're most likely going to be in fear a lot. And in fear, you're not going to have access to your best stuff. So even if you have, written down your vision and your mission or whatever, and you have these hypothetical beliefs, the way you're living your life, if you're not really grounded in all four areas of these archetypes, it can allow you to
I'll give you an example. Right? And I'll give you an example of just that. Evolution in my life, how the benefit of using the proper warrior energy was for me. So I learned about this when I was 53, 54. I'm 60 now, right? So I was going, into high pressure meetings with high powered attorneys, financial advisors. I'm in the top percentile. So I'm used to being in big rooms with shirt and ties and crucial conversations. Stakes are high. Agendas are all out there on the table. And I've never been intimidated. I mean, you know me. I'll go toe-to-toe with anybody.
Yep.
Okay? You're not going to scare me away.
Yep.
Yet even with that, after I learned more about the true warrior energy, I had an even higher sense of confidence and courage in those situations. But it was that kind of quiet with the shield kind, like you just referred to. It was that kind of like, bring it. Like, is that all you got? Oh, come on. Give me some more. That's all you got? Okay, are you ready now to hear my side or talk to me? So it was just, that was one of the first benefits that I remember telling my wife that when I went to this place this weekend, like one of my shadows, we'll talk about shadows too. We learn about our shadows. A really big part of men's work is to get men in touch with their shadow side. Now, shadows we define as those parts of ourselves that we hide, repress, or deny. Mm-hmm. The parts of ourselves that we don't really like, that come out once in a while when we kick the dog, when we get scared or angry or lonely or in fear. And so a true king energy knows his shadows.
Right.
And I went to a weekend with a guy and I was driving home in the car and he says, "You mean we never get rid of our shadows?" I said, "No, you never get rid of your shadows, but you keep them out in front of you and you go, I see you and I accept you and I bless you where you're at, but you're not going to trip me up today."
Right. You're aware of them.
Yeah.
And again, so if we think about shadows triggering us, in that space, if we're not aware or we've been suppressing, right, that's when they jump out.
And they take control of you.
They take control. And so part of the work of understanding what your shadows are is really understanding when you're like, I don't know. Well, hungry, ain't lonely, tired kind of sounds like the same type of thing, right?
That's the triggering energy sometimes. But here's how men know. If you do things by accident, you meet guys and they keep doing things by accident. I didn't mean to do that, but I did it again. That's a shadow.
Right.
We also say in the king work we do, if there's something you want and you don't have it, it's one of your shadows that's preventing you from getting it. Right. But nobody else. So let's go and find out what it is. Why don't you have that, what you want? Yeah. It's great. And I came from a king. I went to one of these weekends recently and it was just around the king archetype for 4 days. And it was beautiful because being the king energy, we got to stay in a nice hotel. We had nice meals. It was like nice, easy calendar. And we came away with a lot of shadow awareness and king energy and we got in touch with our mortality. It was just great.
So I remember you had told me a little bit of a story about a friend of yours who, I'm not going to remember it perfectly, but he was in a situation, right, where there was a confrontation. And so really thinking about like, how did he respond and in that particular situation? Tell more of the details.
That's a great story. I've been saving it for you because I wanted you to hear it first from me. I have so many examples of what men's work is all about and what's the point of it. And I want to say this before. It's not just about helping us. We always have the saying, it's me, us, and them. I want to become the best man I can be, the best dad, brother, friend, boss, so that the men around me in my community can become the best men they can, and then society becomes the best men. So we want to stop having man boys running the country, right? Things like that, and tyrannical kings, right? So it's big work and it's important work, but it starts on the individual and then it spreads like that. And this was a great story that I want to tell without breaking his anonymity. So when you do a weekend and you form this brotherhood, okay, it's not a cult. It's a very, but there's agreements of confidentiality.
Yeah, and it's just because you brought up cult, it's almost the antithesis of a cult, because a cult is where you give away your thinking to somebody else.
Right.
And in this work, it's really about owning yourself rather than giving away yourself. So, So in Jamie Wheel's book,
the ethical cult.
The ethical cult, right? Yeah, so it's really more of like
building that, right?
Yeah, building the ethical cult, which is essentially a non-cult. It's the idea that you're growing and you're owning and you're thinking and you're interdependent rather than dependent. Right.
And so we talk about circles, so we circle up, so the men circle up. My wife hates that term, by the way, but we circle up and we share. And we usually open up, with a centering and a grounding, and then any man can share. Yep. And we have clearings. If a man has a problem, we have a process for clearing things that are blocking you. But anyway, there's this other thing that. So we have this weekend, and there's 60 men, 50, 60 men in this weekend, right? And so they all have emails and they're all in touch. And probably 30 of the men know each other well because they've done many years of weekends. And half of the men just joined the group, okay?
Right,
And they don't know everybody, but that's the container. We call it that's the container. So we all share the email. We all have on the text. And if a man gets in crisis, he does a weekend or he's in between weekends or whatever, we're living all over the country, you can call in your circle for help. Mm-hmm. And this is rarely done. It's done usually when a man is ready to kill himself or ready to kill somebody else or about to be killed. Right. I mean, it's that
pretty heightened, right?
Pretty heightened. And he says, he puts out, I'm calling a circle. If you're not really doing something really important, you're kind of going to get there.
Right.
You're not obligated to, but you're going to show up.
Right.
So I went to this weekend in Georgia, and I was a guest staffer there. I didn't know anybody there. Just went to a weekend in Georgia with a friend. I met all these cool people. And this one individual who was our medic for the weekend, he was a neurologist from a big city here in the country. And he was a Muslim. And he invited us to prayer with him one morning at 6:30 on the most holy of their day. And I call myself a recovering Catholic, right? And he invited anybody who wants to join him and his Muslim friend out on the lawn at 6:30. So I showed up with 3 other guys, and we had this beautiful prayer, and I connected with this guy in such a genuine way, right? Gave us a good lesson on what his beliefs were, and this beautiful prayer chanted in this ancient language, very loving. Anyway, fast forward a week later, I have this great experience with all these guys. We leave, and an email goes out from this guy, this doctor, and he says, I'm calling in the circle. There was a mass shooting at a clinic in a big city, and he was the attending physician on staff. And the shooter was on the opposite side of an interior wall. And his nurse practitioner, during the shooting, actually opened up the door, and the shooter turned with his gun. And she slammed the door. And 5 of the employees lied on the ground with my friend on top. And he was sharing this story. He put together a YouTube sharing of it in a blank screen. And he sent it to the group, okay? And he said, you can share it amongst our group, but it wasn't a groveling, dramatic retelling of this situation that he went through. It was a calm, courageous clarity that he had during this whole 12-minute, 14-minute episode, okay? When he was expecting bullets to be flying through the sheetrock wall. And the amazing thing to me was I was in the audience, and we were the ones that were the groveling, dramatic people. And so he calls in the circle of this support. And again, like I said, this happens rarely when a man is in real crisis. And it was more about him honoring us, the group, for giving him the strength and clarity to take into leadership and go through that situation, right? From all he's learned from his brothers. And I never felt more useful in my life, even just as a fly on the wall in that group, to be counted as one of those guys that helped this guy. Right. And that's the magic of men's work to me. It's things like that.
One of the things that brought up to me, I remember I had done some other work, not men's work. It was a different, but transformational program. And as I moved through it, I remember one time there was, they had really made a big deal about integrity of time. And so I was honoring the integrity of time, but the leaders actually weren't. And so the time had run out, and I had an appointment for later in the evening. And I said, okay, I need to leave. And the woman that was leading it at the time said, well, where are you going? I said, I have a prearranged meeting that I have to attend. And she says, well, the work we're doing here isn't being done anywhere else. Something in that close vein. And I said, well, see, that's a challenge, because I was actually doing this to go do the work out there. Right. And that's kind of what you're talking about. You do the work. We
do the work
so that you can take it out. Right. The idea is like you kind of go into the gym so you can play the sport. Right. So you get in shape, you do the practice so you can play the game, not so you can just do the practice.
And thank you. This was a perfect example that my friend, demonstrated, that because of the work he does here, he's able to step up into his life. So I see so many opportunities where even in the men around me and the women around me and my kids,
Right.
For using these tools. And so it's a big part of my life. I'm going to continue to do it. The last analogy I like to give you is I thought of this when I did a weekend last month, this King weekend. It's like whenever I feel, even for me, I feel like I want to put something into the circle, right? I have something that I want to let go of, something I want advice on. And it feels like a boulder. It feels like this big, heavy boulder. All right, I'm ready to go. I'm going to throw it out here in the group. But it's really like a pebble to them. They all in the group, it's a pebble. And they can easily hold it, and they can carry it, and they can polish it, and they can hand it back to me, and they'll keep it, whatever. It isn't a burden to them. Where outside of these circles, in the men that I usually have, you're going to get something. I'm going to get some uncomfortability, or they're going to try and fix me, or they're going to try and change the subject. They're going to pat me on the back, or all those kind of things.
Okay,
it's
you're
okay,
gonna be okay.
or that person sucks, or whatever they want to co-sign or discount. It's just a different environment, and that's a magic, metaphorically, of what men's work is for me, and I hope for all my friends.
Yeah, and again, I think that MKP is a fantastic organization. I'm going to go bigger general, and just say that why it's so important for us to be doing that introspective work and thinking about our own growth and development.
Right.
And many people have different paths, and it's important that we continue to grow and develop so that we have those skill sets. And the other thing that I'll just kind of, from a perspective point of view, sometimes when something's really close to you, right? Because something's close, like even if you were to take my fist, right? And I put my fist right here, it looks huge because it takes up the whole view.
Right.
But it's not that big to the people that you're going to hand it to.
Right.
Right. Because you're going to take this thing and you're like, oh my gosh, this is this huge boulder.
That's a good analogy.
And then
it's a great analogy.
You get to zoom out, and other people they don't have the same limiting beliefs you have. They don't have the same story you have. And all of a sudden they're able to see that from a different perspective. And they're able to give it a different context, where sometimes what we have as our own stories, our own boulders in this situation, are so tight to us that they seem overwhelming. And so having support groups, whatever kind they happen to be, having people that you really trust that are going to allow you to struggle, but know that you're struggling with a safety net.
Right.
You're not struggling on your own. That but you're going to let you grow through it. We're not going to take the boulder and remove it. It's still going to be, you're going to learn how to solve it. We're not going to solve it for you.
Right.
But you know that there's others that are there kind of helping you look at it through some different ways. So that's really cool.
And if I can expand on what you just said, again, this King weekend and this King archetype energy is fresh in my mind. What they kept teaching us is, a true king can bless you in your shadows. Now, bless not in a religious sense.
Right.
They define bless as showing you unconditional, positive regard for who you are, that part of you.
Right.
So you show me a shadow, a part of you that you're ashamed of. And I show you unconditional, positive regard for you in that place.
Right. I forget who that was. One of the great psychologists from like the 30s or 40s that had kind of phrased that. And it says, I think it's Adler. But basically the idea that that's really what therapy is.
Yes.
Right. That's what therapy is. Being able to give that positive regard, so that you're able to relax into and understand that you're okay where you are.
Yep.
We're not here to make you different. You're whole and you're capable and and in that space, then you can make different choices.
Right.
But that's a capability that's for you.
And that part of you don't have to let that part of you drive the train.
Right.
Right? You can put them in your wagon. All your shadows you can put in a wagon, and a little red wagon that you're going to carry around with you for the rest of your life.
Yep.
But you're going to keep them and occasionally you're going to pull one out and beat someone over the head with it. We know that.
Yep.
But most of the time they're going to stay in the wagon.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I like to think.
Yeah, that's awesome. Love that. So one of the things you brought up early in this, and I said, we're going to get into that, but we really didn't dive into it. Tell me a little more about I think you mentioned him as the pond guy, the guy with the
pond guy story.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Yeah, this is a story that's just kind of new and unfolding, and I'm going to find out more about it on Sunday. But we talked about our belief systems, right, and how we show up in the world. And about 6 years ago, 2000 15, 16, I guess. I was building a koi pond, or having a koi pond built in my backyard. And it was May of 16, if you remember, in South Florida, we had like 32 inches of rain in like 2 weeks. And it was like the 50-year flood, and Palm City flooded out, and it was crazy. Well, right before that, I contracted a pond guy to come dig my pond. And it was a pretty significant, 20-foot by 10-foot, 4-foot deep pond in my Florida backyard with rocks all around it, brought in with a little tractor and a fountain and pump equipment and pipes and everything else. And this guy showed up from Louisiana with his wife and his 20-something-year-old son in a shitty old truck, blowing smoke. And he worked his ass off in the hot sun, and he dug this pond, and he moved the rock, and he installed the pipes and had it all finished. And I wrote him a check for $13,000, and he drove away. And I could tell the 10 days, 2 weeks he was there, that he was 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bag, and he was probably a drunk, and all his equipment was breaking down, and he was working his ass off, and he's, in my opinion, way too old to be digging in the dirt. It's not going to last much longer, kind of thing.
Right, kind of. He was crystallized
in
energy.
He was in decline, and he was hanging on, raging through his decline. Good analogy. And so I made friends with him, and I was out there almost every day, and I was connecting with him because I can kind of...
Which you do a great job with. I've seen you do that with...
Thank you.
Many of the people that
just
pass through your life.
Yeah,
right?
well, I saw myself in him.
Yeah.
I mean, I was that cigarette smoking, hard working, climbing up with shingles on my shoulder guy at 27, right?
Yeah.
But this guy was closer to my age. So the days after he walked away, the rain started, and every day the pond would cave in slightly, and every day another boulder would be a few more inches in, and finally in a week it was completely caved in. And my wife said, he's never going to come back. That guy's living paycheck to paycheck in a trailer somewhere 50 miles away.
Right.
And I said, no, he's going to come back. He's a good man. I know him. I connected with him. He's going to do the right thing. So there was a belief system there, right?
Yep.
That I believed this guy was going to do that.
Two belief systems, right?
Two belief systems, right? That were equally valid based on evidence that we saw.
Accumulated through life.
But I was out there connecting with him every day. So I had
kind of more evidence.
I had more evidence. I saw a few more colors than she did. And sure enough, I called him up, and he was shocked, and he was appalled, and he was like, I really haven't done a lot of pools in Florida with the sand. I'm from Louisiana, and it's never happened to me before. But I'm going to fix it, Mr. Weiler. I'm going to fix it, And so we had to wait 6 months for the water table to go down because we couldn't fix it with water seeping into the pond. So then my mom was like, well, he's definitely not coming back. He won't even be in the state in 6 months. He seemed like a transient type. He'd probably be gone. So I said, no, he's gonna come back. I know he will, right? So sure enough, 6 months later, when it dried out, he came back, and he came back without any charge. He was going to come back with his son and his mother, and he dug out this whole pond. He dug out all the rocks, and he filled sandbags. I hired another pond guy to consult with him. They come up with a plan. They made hundreds of sandbags. So now we lined the whole pond with sandbags. Very laborious. And I paid him, even though he didn't expect it, and I didn't need to. I knew he was paying his wife. I knew he was broke. I knew he had no money in the bank.
Right.
And he had to feed himself, and he's driving from 50 miles away. So I paid him a couple $1,000s more to fix it. And we became really good friends, okay? And so I never really talked with him again after that, right? And he was appreciative. I was appreciative. The pond is gorgeous. So 6 years later, about a month ago, the pump's leaking. And I have a pond guy out there, and he says, I can fix that, but you need to know where the check valve is. I said, well, I'll call my pond guy up. And I call up Jack, and I say, hey, where's the check valve? And he tells me, he said, by the way, how you doing? He said, I'm not doing that good. My son died last year. I said, oh, what happened? He said, we don't really know. Maybe he was drinking, but, he's gone. And he said it in a really kind of typical shutdown male way, right? That he's not going to go there. He's just going to give me the facts. And I wasn't going to get all mushy with him at the time, but I saw, wow, that's a trauma. This is an opportunity for me to step into my kingship and put to work what I've been teaching myself all these years. So I invited him up. I said, you should come up and look at this beautiful pond. We have We have a dome over it, and we have flowers around it. We have butterflies and birds.
Yeah, it's super cool.
Super cool place. It's
like a Thunderdome that's inside. It's all like
it's
ponded up and decorated.
It's awesome.
Growth. It's really awesome.
I got music in there. I got koi fish in there. It's beautiful, a fountain. So I said, you should come up with your wife and spend a Sunday afternoon. And, here, I send him videos of it. And he was like, yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good. I will. And then I re-invited him because I wanted to make sure he knew that I was sincere and not just glad talking to him. And so I reached out a couple times with him. And then I thought, man, I should invite him to a weekend. I should invite him to a men's group. I should invite him to a book club. I should be this guy's friend. I have the time now.
Right.
This is my part-time job. This is my work. I can offer it to people. So I pinged him a couple of times, and he's planning to come up. But then I got an email from him on Tuesday night, 2 days ago. And I'll paraphrase it for you, but it basically said, I really appreciate you reaching out to me. My life has not been good. There's not a moment goes by when I don't think about my son. I drink myself into oblivion every night. I have no friends, and I'm not good at asking for help. But I really could use advice from someone like you that might change the direction of my life if I come talk to you. I have time on the 4th, which is this Sunday, if you have time for me. And I don't know what the hell I'm doing on Sunday, but I pinged him right back. I'm free Sunday.
Right.
Come up. Sunday morning, we'll drink hot coffee. We'll sit around a fire by your beautiful pond, and we'll have a heart-to-heart talk. I know I can help you. Thanks for calling on me. That was my response to him. And very fulfilling for me.
Right.
That was the payoff for me of all the work that I do. That this guy.
In some ways, it's your situation, like the gentleman in that in the big town, the big city we were talking about, right? This is, you do the work so you can do this.
Exactly. Right. My friend in the big city. So he's coming up Sunday morning. I'm going to throw a big book at him in a 12 and 12 and say, you got to get sober for number one. Right. And I'll help you do that. I can't get sober for you, but I can tell you I did it, and here's how you can do it, and here's a meeting, and get going. And then I can be his accountability partner. I can teach him what accountability is. I can show him what reaching out for support is, what it feels like to have a brother that really sees you where you're at in unconditional positive regard and says, I see you in all of your shame, and I love you, and you're going to be okay, and it's up to you. And here's the cave, and it's going to be scary, right? I love metaphors. I said, but we've been in the cave, and I want to take you in there. I'm not going to drag you. I'm not going to wait for you too long, but you're going to follow me in the cave, slay your dragon, because he's got your treasure, and come out with your gold.
Yeah.
And that's
beautiful.
That's the last story I had about that. But, well, not the last story. It's going to have another story when
it will continue to evolve. But I think another point I want to kind of emphasize there is, one, you do the work so that when the challenges show up, you're ready for them.
Right.
Right. So we can't, if we don't expand intentionally through work of some sort, right, then we don't really have the capacity when something like that shows up. And somebody comes into the world, your world, and they lay that on you. Mm-hmm. And then you're only kind of like those other people you were making reference to. Oh, it's good. You're going to be all right.
Oh, you're okay.
You're going to get through it.
Yeah.
You're going to be over, which isn't going to serve him. And in many ways, it's disrespectful because you're not hearing him.
And that's what he's been hearing his whole life. That's what we all hear our whole life. We hear it right from the top, the media, the government, our parents, our relatives. It's all, I mean, not always, but
there's a lot of it.
There's a lot of it. It's hard to find real, authentic, positive regard for someone who's in a shitty place and say, I'm with you.
And I'm going to use your endurance background. It's kind of like showing up to a marathon and saying, I'm going to run the marathon. And say, great, tell me about your training. Well, I didn't train. What do you mean you didn't train? You're about to run 26 miles, and you're like, no, I didn't train. That's what it's like to live in life, and you won't even notice the challenges that are there that you have the potential to solve.
Right.
And unless you continually grow and evolve. And that's the coolest thing about men's work with MKP or doing coaching work or things along those lines. It gives you the capabilities to continue to expand your capacity so that you're continually able to handle bigger and bigger challenges, but you handle them in flow because that's where that is your capacity. Just like running the marathon, when you did the training, you can go run the marathon. But if you just show up for the race, it's ridiculous. It's not going to happen.
Yep. And I think if you ask my wife and my kids, I think I've always been that person to some regard because I've had such negative emotions and I've had hard times. In fact, in Arthur's book, he has a whole chapter about how important failure and negative emotions are that create this psychoimmuneness to us that we can handle, and we're happier people because we've had shitty times, and we can overcome things that would crush and crumble another person and freak out. So I've always been that calm in the storm. I'm the guy you want in a fire or a hurricane, right? But even more so when I've done this men's work, what I think I'm trying to finally learn is, when I talk about the work or when I spread the work, I don't want to do it evangelically, for lack of a better word. You know what I mean?
I do.
I don't want to sound, and Michelle is so good at reminding me at times when I get a little bit too excited. Like my shadow, one of my many shadows, my shadow is, I know what the fuck you need. Right. Just do what I say and you'll be happy, right? And I have to back off and just show you what I have done, how it's worked in my life, show you the parts of me that haven't improved, not just here's what I did, go do it.
Yeah, it's even the idea of the AA introduction or going to the cave and I'm not going to wait for you. Those ideas are that you can't force somebody. You can let somebody know that there's a path that they may benefit by considering.
Right, but you can't push them into the cave.
Yeah, you push them into the cave. Then
I'd like to push a couple guys into the cave because I know it would work, but
it wouldn't work if you pushed them in.
If I pushed them in,
right? Because if you push somebody in, then they have resistance up, rather than an openness.
Right.
And so we have to walk into the cave on our own.
We do, and it's such a great metaphor.
So anyway, I just want to express my appreciation. This is a lot of fun. I love you, my friend.
Thank you. I love you too, man.
We have had a lot of fun times and growth together, and I'm sure we'll continue. Thank you for sharing your stories with.
Thank you. Hope it came out good. I'd like to get a copy, and
we'll get you a copy, and we'll get you rocking and rolling, and we'll do it again sometime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Love you.
Love you too. Bye-bye.